There's a strange truth buried deep in the Cold War's field manuals, one that, honestly, many modern survival enthusiasts tend to overlook. While today's audiences instantly associate concealment with ghillie suits, the armies of the 1950s through the late 1980s quietly relied on a different system. One that quite often actually outperformed the classic sniper's suit in real battlefield conditions. It wasn't bulky, it didn't trap heat. And, well, it didn't require hours of attaching jute, burlap, or vegetation. Instead, this method was so effective that it allowed reconnaissance troops, sappers and forward observers to operate far closer to enemy lines than most people realize, long before thermal optics or HD cameras dominated surveillance. Veterans from both NATO and Warsaw Pact units later admitted that this approach blended better in mixed terrain, held up longer in wet environments, and avoided the one weakness ghillie suits never could escape: their tendency to form recognizable shapes when viewed from unusual angles or under shifting light. This is the forgotten Cold War camo that quietly outperformed the legendary ghillie suit. And once you understand the principle behind it, you'll never look at concealment the same way again. During the height of the Cold War, NATO and Warsaw Pact analysts faced a growing challenge. Reconnaissance aircraft were improving rapidly, drone prototypes were emerging, and long-lens surveillance became more common along borders. A traditional ghillie suit worked well in static sniper roles, but failed in dynamic reconnaissance missions because its bulky silhouette cast unnatural shadows and gathered moisture. Troops needed something that maintained concealment without sacrificing mobility or comfort. The solution became a category of ultra-thin disruptive garments, sometimes referred to in documentation as mesh overbreak or fragmentation overlays. Unlike the ghillie suit, these didn't attempt to replicate vegetation. They disrupted the soldier's outline through extremely fine texture, micro-shadows, and irregular color transitions. Because they created subtle distortion instead of relying on material bulk, they were harder to detect under the varied lighting conditions common in real missions. The secret behind these garments was that they took advantage of how human eyes and early optical devices lock onto shapes. A ghillie suit breaks the shape of a head and shoulders by adding mass. But that mass becomes its own shape when observed at odd angles, especially from above. Mesh disruptive garments, on the other hand, broke the silhouette through absence. Light passed through the fabric, creating a mottled, inconsistent edge rather than a full outline. When combined with micro-pattern streaks or specks painted on the uniform beneath, the operator looked less like an object and more like a patch of complex terrain. Field tests in the 1970s consistently showed that soldiers equipped with these overlays were harder to detect from aerial platforms, especially when lying still among mixed foliage, rocks, or brush. Even in winter environments where traditional ghillie suits stood out against barren terrain, the mesh-based system continued to fragment outlines effectively because it didn't rely on added vegetation. Anyone wanting to apply this technique in real outdoor settings can do so with minimal equipment. Start by selecting a thin, wide-weave mesh fabric. Military surplus mosquito netting or lightweight camo net offcuts work well. Cut the material large enough to cover the shoulders, upper arms, and back when draped loosely. Next, lightly streak the underlying clothing with narrow patches of 3 tones, a base tone matching local soil or bark, a darker tone for shadows, and a light tone for highlights. The goal is not to create a pattern, but to break the predictability of the surface. Once the base is prepared, drape the mesh over it and attach only minimal anchoring points, allowing it to shift naturally with movement and airflow. The interplay between the micro-streaked surface and the light-passing mesh creates an irregular, depth-rich effect that honestly outperforms large camo areas. So, one practical example is setting up a low-profile observation post in mixed scrub. Instead of building a large, vegetation-heavy hide that, really risks detection when the wind shifts, it's often better to use a small mesh overlay combined with a streaked tarp or poncho. The result, well, it blends in quite nicely even when the surrounding foliage is thin or inconsistent. Actually, photographers in wildlife zones have adopted similar methods by stretching mesh over their gear, just to break up the edges without adding weight. A critical advantage of the mesh overbreak system was endurance. Soldiers conducting long patrols across the German border zones or Soviet Far East terrain reported that ghillie suits snagged on branches, absorbed water, and added unnecessary heat during movement. The Cold War overlay system avoided these issues entirely. It weighed almost nothing, dried quickly, and didn't create the thermal load associated with heavy suits. Reconnaissance specialists needed to move silently, blend quickly, and maintain visual concealment without setting up a static hide. The ability to achieve high-level disruption without carrying kilograms of burlap was a significant edge. Another point often forgotten is uniformity. Ghillie suits rely heavily on natural vegetation, but the moment the surrounding plants dry, yellow, or shift with weather, the suit may no longer match. The Cold War system was environment independent, relying instead on pure silhouette disruption. In the field, this meant a soldier could cross from forest to brush to rocky escarpment without needing to rebuild their camouflage. What makes this technique so valuable today is its adaptability. It doesn't require specialized materials, heavy suits, or perfect environmental matching. It relies on principles of vision science that haven't changed. Modern drones and observers still detect outline before anything else, and breaking that outline with fine-scale disruption remains one of the most effective forms of passive camouflage. Whether you're building a temporary hide, photographing wildlife, trekking through contested landscapes, or studying Cold War history through hands-on practice, mesh-based silhouette disruption offers a cleaner and more reliable method than bulky ghillie materials. If this deep dive into forgotten Cold War fieldcraft enriched your understanding, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning and share this guide with fellow history and survival enthusiasts. This channel grows when viewers like you pass these timeless insights forward.